Welcome, dear producers and also directors. We are really delighted to have you on this nice evening and very early morning over there. I know that it's very early, so I really appreciate it. And without further ado, I will leave the mic for Andy to make some opening remarks. I know that he is very famous, so he hardly needs an introduction, but we'll just say that as studies from University of, and he is a Emmy Award-winning who spent his career for producing TV stations. He is wide his documentaries and Andy, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. And usually Ahlam goes first when we do these things, but since I have to run off in a few minutes, I'll do a quick introduction and then pass it off to her. So first of all, thank you so much for having us and for screening this documentary. We sincerely appreciate it. We think this story is so important now more than ever. Before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge that both of us are speaking to you from unceded colonized Kumeyaay land. And so we just want to acknowledge that. And I also want to say on a personal note that Istanbul is the first city I ever went to outside of America. And so I still have very fond memories of it. But this project started many years ago. Ahlam can tell you how she started her research in refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria. I came into it a little bit later. I got my master's degree in Middle East studies. And while I was getting my degree, I, of course, studied Palestine and knew all the history and the facts and the figures you're supposed to know. But I couldn't wrap my mind around like why this continued, like why did it keep going? I couldn't understand it. And so after I graduated, I started reading about the year 1948, and only then did it really click for me. Only then did it make sense, like, oh, this is the reason behind the building of the wall, the home demolitions, everything that happens, in today happened like is a result of 1948, and you can't understand it without understanding 1948. And so I realized that if I had gone through an entire graduate program and still couldn't make sense of Israeli-Palestinian issues, how could an average person in America or anywhere in the world just watching the news ever make sense of it? And so I said, someone needs to make a documentary, and apparently that someone was us. So when I first met Ahlam, she was working on doing a lot of refugee narrative stories, and we decided to make it a much bigger project and tell the entire story of 1948 as best we could in an hour and 26 minutes. And so we worked together and did interviews across 7 different countries in 3 different languages. We did about 20,000 pages of research. We did, and then we, had all those interviews translated. We did a whole lot of research on archival images and film. And so we gathered, we have a collection of over 2,000 archival images, military documents, and film clips that we have collected. And then we put that all together and made this documentary that's an hour and 26 minutes long. And we're very pleased with how it's been doing, especially because when we first started this project, I think both of us knew it would take a lot of work. I personally said, this is the biggest project I've ever done in my life. It's, there's no way it's going to be done until next year. And I was off by about 9 years. It took us 10 years to produce this documentary. There was so much back and forth, so much research, and then we would think we were done, and then all of a sudden a new story would come up, and we couldn't ignore it, and so we had, we would stop for some time. Like one time we stopped for almost a year to do research just for one story, and we can tell you about that later. This is the Deir Yassin story. So it was a massive project, but we were really proud of the story we're able to tell, and we think that it's so important to share this with the world. And so we very much appreciate you holding this screening.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Ahlam, I will just make a small introduction. Dr. Ahlam Muhtaseb is a professor of media studies and graduate coordinator of the Department of Communication Studies at California University, San Bernardino. She is the recipient of 2020 CBUS Outstanding Scholarship Research Creative Active Awards 29-2020, Outstanding Research and Creative Activity Faculty Mentor awardees, and so goes on the list. I'm not going to read all of them.
You don't have to read it. You don't have to read it. It's online. Thank you.
Yeah, just give some credit to the amazing work. That's the idea here. So thank you very much, Dr. Ahlam. Please, can you make some remarks? We will really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for screening the film and for hosting us. And apologies for being late, but honestly, I didn't receive the link. So, and there was no calendar invite. So if it's not on my calendar, it's hard for me to remember because I do a lot of engagements these days. But I appreciate, the fact that you actually screened the film and you are hosting us. This film was a labor of love and dedication. We are still working, believe it or not, we released it in 2017, but we still have a lot of work to do. We are now trying to use all the materials that we haven't used in the film. So we did like 90 interviews, but we used only 33 in the film. So we're trying to make all of this information available for people. As Andy said, for me, it all started even before I met Andy, before I knew him. And this was during my field work in the Palestinian refugee camps in Syria and in Lebanon. And at that time, I was, a junior scholar, junior faculty member, and I wanted to study, like cognitive narratology and the impact of trauma, collective trauma on collective identity and on collective like meta-narrative among Palestinian refugees in diaspora or in Shatat. And then I met Andy, and Andy, as he said, he had his reasons for actually focusing on the year 1948. So we decided to team up. We started working on it. And as he said, we didn't expect this to take this long, but it did. And we're just grateful that we did this project. And every day we discovered how important it was. People have been reaching out from across the world, like, the case of Turkey. And, if you know anyone who's interested in screening, just let us know because we want everyone to know about this important history. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Make some remarks and then we will return to audience for the questions and comments. And I hope that you will elaborate on it even more. So I will just start by recognizing this amazement work by saying that it's one of the probably unique monumental works standing out there with regard to unwritten history of this genocide and catastrophe, because I didn't, as someone who is really interested in this area, I didn't see many of this kind of work, and especially regarding this Israeli narrative, one-sided Israeli narrative, which is very overwhelmingly repeated in central media, saying that, well, it was just a state creation and we came to Palestine, which was promised to us, and we had nowhere else to go, so we had to come to this land. And then Arabs started to make problems, and then they wanted to expel us and kill us and make a genocide. We had to defend ourselves. And then at the end, they had to flee, and they decided to go away. And then the other side of the story saying that, well, we defeated 6 Arab armies and we well deserved this land because we had to stand here and defend our brand, which is basically a production for American, mostly American audience for consumption, especially for the average person. So I really upload this kind of work, which is unique in its kind. And also, I want to ask you, starting with this question, that we now know what actually motivated you, almost got the idea, but how did you motivate the witnesses to speak about it? So on both sides, like, it seems that you don't want to tell the story from one side and the other side tells the opposite narrative. On the contrary, they are telling the same narrative, but from their own perspective. And I just want to start by asking that how you motivated to victims to talk about their agonies, and how to motivate the witnesses of this crime to braggingly almost talk about their experiences.
Thank you. That's a good question. So I will start with the Palestinian side, which I did a lot of that, many of these interviews. So for the Palestinian side, it's actually what motivated me to even do a film in the first place, because when I was doing my field work, I got grants from the university, and I bought filming equipment, and I wanted to do a small scale video, for classroom use. And what motivated me was the fact that Palestinians wanted their story to be known. So I thought, from a social justice perspective in research, you want to give back to the community you study. So it was easy. On the Palestinian side, almost every Palestinian we approached, except for maybe two people, who didn't. One was hesitant, but she eventually actually did the interview, and the other didn't want to do the interview and said, "This is useless. We have been doing interviews since 1948, and nobody cares." But the rest wanted still to speak, in spite of that. The challenge was the Israeli interviewees, right? So from day one, we decided that Andy would do the interviews, because I'm Palestinian and I have, like, my last name is, my first and last name are obviously Arabic. And also I'm visibly Muslim. So it's impossible for an Israeli to sit down with me and do an interview about what they did in 1948. So this is an act, like, kind of like the psychological aspect of it, but also in terms of access. I, as a Palestinian, although I'm American, I'm American citizen, and I have the US passport, but I am from the West Bank. I have the West Bank ID, which limits me when I go to Palestine. The Israelis prevent me from crossing the imaginary green line that divides the West Bank. And now, of course, it's a wall that divides the West Bank and the rest of Palestine, historical Palestine, under the Israeli colonization. So physically, I cannot cross and interview Israeli. So from day one, we decided Andy would do it. And I think since Andy is a white, young man at that time, we're talking about almost 14 years ago now, 15 years ago, actually, when we started the film. So, like, they have this American from California. He played that role well. I'm just here to learn, like, to speak to you. But even that wasn't easy, because initially Andy had worked with Israeli production assistants, and they prepared a list of Israelis for him who lived through 1948, who actually participated in the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. But when he was about to leave, those Israeli production assistants, and those are like anti-Zionist, radical Israelis who are very tiny little bit of the society. The majority of society are not like that. They told him that no one wanted to speak from the Israelis they wanted to talk to. And Andy told them, well, I have to come, I reserved my ticket, so let's just play it by ear. And he said, I'm going to interview Palestinians also, Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, which he did. He did some really good interviews also there. When he went, they started, a process of snowball sampling process, and tried to speak as many as you see. And that's only like part of the long list we have. And it was very interesting. As Andy reported to us, some of them started talking and then they stopped. some of them, their spouses were very angry at them for speaking about this. They wanted to stop them. And some just said it the way it is and didn't care, like Mordechai Ben Or, who shoots the Palestinian at point blank, basically, and kills him. So we had those range. And for Andy, his process was simply just to listen. And since a lot of the interviews were in Hebrew, he just let them speak because he also didn't understand what they were saying. So didn't use many probing questions and just gave them space to speak and listen mainly. I think that was his process, but again, the fact that you're talking about a racist society. So the fact that Andy was a white American from California, I think played a role in making them feel, okay, I'm comfortable speaking about this in front of him. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they said everything, right? So this is what they told us during the interviews, but I don't know how much they held back.
Just one follow-up question. You talk about your experience and you told us something about Andy's experience. What kind of a reaction you got after finishing? I know that it's a very painful work and took a lot of time to complete this, and it's not easy to find funds and grants for making such an outstanding and extraordinary documentary. So what are the reactions you received after starting to screening the movie and when it was out there eventually? Do you have anything to tell about this regard?
Yes, sure. First, it's just because you mentioned the challenges, the financial challenges, you are absolutely right, except the grants that I got from my school. We applied left and right and no one wanted to fund the film. No one wanted us even to talk about it. We tried even to say it's neutral, we're going to talk to all people, we're going to talk all historians, Palestinians, Israelis. They still didn't want to fund the film. And eventually we paid a lot of, the expenses out of our pocket or through the community. So at the end, we did a Kickstarter campaign where over 500 people contributed. So it became kind of a community project, and we were only like tools in that project. And that's why we registered it as a nonprofit LLC. Like Andy and I, we don't make any profit of the film. It's really a community effort at the end. And many people even volunteered their labor, which was very, very impressive. Like we had graduate students, for example, going to England and getting us, 2 documents from the British Museum, and they refused to be paid. So we had a lot of those examples of community members doing great work. A lot of Palestinians hosted Andy in their homes in Palestine. And, my close Lebanese friend hosted me for a whole month in her apartment, while I was filming in Lebanon. So those kinds of things made it really a community work or project. Challenges, yes, we received a lot of challenges. So when we did the global premiere was at the Arizona International Film Festival, which is interesting, among all other film festivals, the first to actually give us the premiere was in Arizona, which is a very, conservative state. But it was amazing because the screening sold out, and people were really receptive to the film. So that was our first test, right? How are people going to receive it? There was a Zionist in the audience who kept on just talking and talking for 5 minutes, and then people told her to basically ask a question or be silent. And then from there, when the film started having its name and getting, screening all over the United States and beyond, like in Australia and South Africa and Europe, the Zionists started paying attention. And the Israeli lobby itself, AIPAC, actually started trying to stop certain screenings. So we noticed that every time there was an official screening at a university where colleges were involved in the planning or departments, like when it was more official by a university, this is when they really attacked hard When it was student organizations, they didn't care much. I mean, they tried still to stop it in some places, especially Harvard, but it wasn't as aggressive as when it was, an official screening by a college or a department or a center. And the worst cases were at my own campus in Palm Desert. So my campus, Cal State. So Cal State has 23 campuses, and I'm in San Bernardino, but we have a satellite campus in the desert. And I've never seen as many angry white people at that screening as I saw that day, because APAC mobilized them. And during the screening, the APAC guy himself came until the last minute and talked on stage, came and talked to the dean of our campus and tried to stop the screening while I was standing there until the very last minute. But thankfully, like there are still people who, still respect freedom of expression and, freedom of speech. So they didn't listen to him, and they said, have you seen the film? And he said, no. They said, okay, could you please take a seat and watch with us? And then we will have a conversation. And the UC Irvine's 3 colleges did a public screening, and that drove them nuts. And UC Irvine has a lot of Zionists. So there was a demo. They received hundreds of letters to try to stop the screening, but it still went through because, like according to the US Constitution, they can't stop screening. So the last example I'm going to give which was the worst, is from the city of West Hollywood. So it's a small city in LA, in Los Angeles, and it's called West Hollywood. And in that city, we managed to get a screening of the film that was part of a speaker series the city does called Human Rights Speaker Series. So we landed the screening there, and it sold out. And just a few days before the screening was supposed to happen, and this was the end of 2018, yes, 2000, that was in December of 2018, they started receiving, an enormous number of letters, the city council, and we were shocked that they said they postponed it, but in reality, they canceled the screening. But we pushed back, and I have a lot of colleagues who wrote to the city council. Even my school, I mean, my school is not a Zionist school, so they actually, even the deans, wrote letters, and we pushed back. They said, oh, we are just postponing it to publicity, and I was like, it's sold out. So there was back and forth, and I was in the news every week almost, and it was focusing mainly on me, not Andy, because I'm, the brown woman. And it was very stressful because they would say some things like anti-Semitic, promoting hatred, and promoting terrorism, and that was in the newspaper of West Hollywood. It was very stressful time, and they canceled it 3 times. Then we landed supposedly a final date, and they said, that's it, you're gonna screen on April 15, I think, 2019. So I went to South Africa, and I had a screening in South Africa. I came back to be shocked that at the April 1st or April 2nd council meeting, they tried to change the whole law, to take out the the vetting process out of the hands of the staff of the council into the hands of the politicians, the council members, 5 of them, actually 6, sorry. And I had to attend, that meeting to push back one more time against their attempts to silence the film. And I had to sit through 46 people who don't know me, most of them hadn't even seen the film at that time, who said terrible things about me, like I'm anti-Semitic, the film is hateful, etc. A film they hadn't seen at that time yet. But the good news is, eventually the vote was, actually it was 5 members, and it was 3 in our favor, 2 against. And the split in the vote was 1 member who actually initially was against the film until she watched it. So when she spoke, and this is actually recorded, you can go to the council city meetings. They put all the recordings. You can still find the recording from 2019 where she said, you know, I watched the film. Was it hard to watch? Yes. Was it hateful? No. Was it anti-Semitic? Absolutely not. And then she voted in favor and we screened. So that's the lobby. In terms of average Americans, if you're interested, the majority of average Americans, they don't know and they welcome the knowledge, honestly. They think the film is balanced. They have been, the reception had been overwhelmingly positive from just an average American audience, which is our target audience. But of course, you know, you have those attempts by the lobby to stop us or, you know, send their agents into screenings and things like that.
Okay, thank you. That was a very humble answer. Yes, the truth survive, I guess. Okay. Any questions from the audience, please? If you may. Please. Yes. Can you come here to ask the question? Because we have a synchronizing issue with regard to the voice. So I'll let him directly ask his question. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Walaikum salam.
I have two quick questions. Maybe Andrew may relate to that as well. As a director, I'd like to ask you, how would you feel?
I can't hear clearly.
Can you?
I can't hear very clearly. Maybe if you can come. Yes, probably because you're using the AirPods.
Okay. Can you hear him now?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I can hear you. By the way, I can't hear. I'm sorry, but you can maybe repeat the question afterwards.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sorry, thank you very much. Have you heard what I said?
No.
Do I need to repeat? Sorry again. Thank you very much for your great effort to make this documentary in life. And I see you have lots of struggle, not only for doing it, but also, you know, to put on the screen. It was hard. I have two quick questions about that. With my great thankfulness to you, to Andrew as well. Actually, the shootings are mostly from the live shootings. And today, we see much horrible scenes, not only in Gaza, but also in West Bank, in all around Palestine. We see much horrific scenes, daily basis. In every 5 minutes, we have new pictures, you know, dismantled bodies of the children, women, and, you know, the innocent people. So how would you feel today in the, you know, ongoing issues in Gaza? How would you feel the worst horrific scenes are happening right now in front of us, in front of the eyes of the world? So how would you feel? Actually, the reality went over the documentary, went over and over. You know, the genocide is much horrific scenes and the captions and, you know, captures of the shootings, not shootings, maybe even small mobiles are capturing all sorts of horrible scenes and the crying men, you know, women, children, and, you know, old people. How would you feel about that? This is the first quick question. And secondly, about the media, actually, Mehmet Fatih has mentioned that about, you know, mainstream media is actually obstructing many shootings and streamings about the realities at the moment, what's going on in Gaza. We have less channels like Al Jazeera or, you know, the personal records about facts. But mainstreams are BBC and all sorts of American media are kind of obstructing. And as I understand, they are using AI as well to, you know, stopping the most of the scenes to be seen mainly for American public area and also for the world, not to see the reality in facts. So how they do that? and how they are able to do that technically, technically speaking, firstly, and then how can they, I'm not surprised, none of us are surprised here, how they can do it humanely, to stop some pictures to be delivered to the world. How would you think about that as someone who is living in States at the moment? Because as kind of our compensation for that, we see other pictures. Many people are demonstrating in the great, squares in the West, and in Trafalgar squares and Times squares. They are demonstrating. So as we see from Istanbul, there are many thousands and millions of people are protesting and discussing what is happening about genocide, although they are big obstruction for them to see more and more reality. What would you think about that? Thank you. Thank you. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Jazakallah.
Thank you very much. I'll try to answer the multiple, aspects of the question, and I will start by how do I feel about that. I feel terrible, honestly, and you mentioned something very important, which is being in the United States, and that's the hardest part for me, honestly, as a Palestinian. I've been telling my colleagues have been reaching out to me and asking, how are you doing, Ahlam? And I was like, how am I doing? The worst thing is being in the belly of the beast. I'm in the belly of the beast. My tax money is aiding in this genocide in Gaza. I think that's probably the hardest thing, is to feel that you are, whether you like it or not, complicit in providing material aid to terrorism by Israelis. It has been very, very tough. And since I feel like my life has been on hold for the last 3 months. I stopped actually walking. I started exercising. I don't even, I have a teenager. I don't have time to work with him on his school projects. And I told him, I explained to him, you will survive, but the people in Gaza can't survive. They can't take a break. They can't stop the bombs going over their heads. And that made me work full gears. That's why I don't mind if somebody tells me, go online at 7 a.m. Have no problem with that. If someone tells me, we want you to come in this, state, go to another state. I've been going everywhere I could, speaking up as much as I could. And I feel I'm only one person, but I feel like a lot of either Palestinians in the diaspora, but even average Americans like Andy. I have seen Andy, for example, doing so many projects for the cause, going out of his way to support. And I've seen this kind of amazing transformation in the American society. And that goes back to the second part of your question. You're absolutely right. And unfortunately, the US media as an institution of power in the United States, alongside, of course, the main institution of power, which is the American government, they do not represent American psyche or American mindset or their opinions on what is happening in Gaza. For example, the latest polls had shown a steady increase in the number or the percentage of Americans who are, number one, for a ceasefire that the government has been saying no to. I mean, we are talking about a ceasefire. We're not talking about, I don't know, establishing even a Palestinian state or anything close to that. Just a ceasefire. And the government is saying no, because our government is in this war alongside Israel. This is not a war by Israel against the Palestinians. It's a war by the US and Israel against Palestinians in Gaza. And the gap, the schism between what Americans now believe and see the path is, and what is the US government and its, as I said, one of its main branches of power is the media, is huge. Because 70% of Americans now support ceasefire. That's according to the latest polls. And the number keeps actually going up. Probably if I look today at the newest numbers, more and more people are supporting the ceasefire. Even someone like Bernie Sanders, who was a total disappointment because he was against the ceasefire. But even him, yesterday, he lashed out at the government and started saying no more aid to US aid to Israel. So that's another issue, is now more than half of the American population, for the first time in history, is against giving military aid to the Israelis. And that's across the board. We're talking Republicans, Democrats, different age groups. In the past, it used to be more of younger Americans who were, like more supportive of Palestinians and their human rights. But now I was surprised that one of the polls showed that people like me, my age, in their 40s and 50s, who are now more than any other age group in the United States, are calling for ceasefire and to end military aid to Israel, or some of them any aid to Israel, not only military aid. And you mentioned the AI, so one wonders if we have a mainstream media that is 100% supportive of Israel. And actually, yesterday I looked at, let me show you. There was a very interesting study I looked at. If I find it here quickly, maybe later. So I could report the numbers of how many times Israeli hostages had been covered in stories. And when they cover them, they humanize them to the max. They mention their names and their kids and their pets and their dreams and hopes, while, comparing that to the number of Palestinian prisoners or, victims, it's almost non-existent, or if it's there, it's usually very detached, no personal stories whatsoever. They are treated as a collective of people that we can't see, we can't have any emotional connection with. So how come with such, media coverage that we still have this amazing support by the majority of the US population now? And I think in spite of the AIs that you mentioned, in spite of the attempts by social media corporations to silence Palestinian voices, they are not capable of the different types of censorship and silencing that the all corporate media, because now people think that social media is different. Well, it's also run by a corporate media, huge corporate media that are now stronger and bigger than even CNN and the typical, perception of mainstream media. So you can look at the AIs. You can look at the fact that the Israeli government doesn't allow any journalists to go into Gaza. They have to be in bed with the Israeli army. And when we can go on and on the different types of silencing, but still the bravery of journalists, citizen journalists, Gazan citizen journalists on the ground, that cost them their lives. We're talking about 104 journalists who had been killed in Gaza. And in spite of that, you have children running with cameras and making sure when they had this tiny bit of internet connectivity, they send their voices out. So number one, I have to give it to the people of Gaza, their determination, their resilience, and their resistance. That's number one factor, because they teach us lessons in perseverance, really, in resistance. And number two, I think the fact that now social media, which are global in nature, and they have outreach that traditional media they don't have, they were impacted by the fact that now they are not all owned by US corporations. And the main one, as you all know, is TikTok. And in spite all the attempts by the Israelis to ban TikTok, or, to impact TikTok's decisions, to censor Palestinian voices, to take down content, to use AIs, they still resisted that. I mean, they might have done it to an extent, but I had an experience where TikTok took my account last week, and they said I posted 3 videos that were very graphic and violent in nature. So I appealed the decision, and in like 5 minutes, my account was restored. That doesn't happen with Meta. That doesn't happen with Facebook or Instagram. And also I have to give something else. So I did a study actually in 2021 with 2 of my colleagues, and we studied what we called digital colonization and digital resistance by Palestinians. So we looked at the colonization and the decolonization aspects on social media when it came to Ma'arakat Sayf al-Quds, or Sheikh Jarrah events, and then Al-Quds or Jerusalem sword battle. And we noticed, we documented all the creative ways in which Palestinian activists and their supporters utilized and employed to defeat the AIs and to make sure that their voices are heard. And there are many creative ways, like using Instagram Live, where they actually cross-post with different influencers to magnify, a live stream, and then they would host people from Gaza. And once you trend, it's very hard to take you down, right? Also, the way they defeated the hashtags, all these, we actually documented it in a study that we presented 2 years ago. And now I'm collecting data also, because this is it's just unbelievable, digital revolution we are witnessing in spite of everything. Thank you. Sorry, it was a long answer, but the question was very long. So.
Thank you very much. Andy, I think you are with us again, and I wonder if you want to just address the questions or the question. I think you figured out, but the main idea here being that Palestinian people are being bullied into silence by mainstream media and new media through the artificial intelligence and other means of wedding. So would you like to address to this one as well, please?
Yeah. Well, I'm upside down. Sorry.
You're upside down.
So I would agree with everything Ahlam just said. The other thing I would point out with social media is Ahlam talked about TikTok, but Meta is really doing a lot to clamp down on Palestinian voices and people who amplify Palestinian voices. So a good example is Sean King, who was a very big voice in America and across the world in the Black Lives Matter movement. And he has been a very, very strong voice in America for getting out Palestinian voices, especially since October 7th. And he was posting, I would say, hourly, every day. And he was getting the word out to people who aren't normally connected to this issue, which I think is incredibly important. And Instagram kept shutting down his posts, and they would also limit the number of people who could see it. They would often limit his posts to only his followers, so they wouldn't spread outside of his followers. And eventually they just shut him down entirely. So every post he's ever done is no longer visible. And there were thousands of them. And that's just one example, but there are many other examples like that of where Meta is limiting the number of posts that people can see from certain individuals, especially individuals inside Gaza. Or, for example, in a very personal level, I have interacted with Ahlam on Facebook many, many times over the years. So you would think that I would see her posts. I literally never see her posts on Facebook unless I actively go to her page. And that's just a very personal example. I will say
which is like shadow banning. So I'm being shadow banned.
It's called shadow banning. Yeah, exactly. And so there's no note from Facebook that tells me, hey, we're not showing you Ahlam's post. They're just not doing. I will say on a brighter note, from my personal friends and family, far more than any other time in history, have reached out to me and asked, what is going on here? Can you help me understand it? Can you help me explain this? And they don't really get it. There isn't a huge understanding among regular American people of what the situation is in Palestine, just in general, much less going on with Gaza. And I think more and more people are trying to figure out what is happening, and they realize that it's not like they've been told. And so I see potential, I see hope for the future. And I think there is potential that something will change. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's moving. So I think there's some good news there.
Andy, do you want me to take this, or do you want me to start and then you can take it?
Yeah, I can definitely talk the most about the violent image thing. So
okay, go ahead.
Why don't you start it and then I'll go.
Okay. Well, the question has two aspects actually. I speak sometimes like a professor, but I can't help it. So I have to break it down. So the first aspect is the issue. So there is the decision-making process, and Andy could also address this, but then there is the issue of access. So there are two reasons or two factors that played a role in the decision-making process of which materials to use and how to present it. And I think for me, the second one is the most important one is the issue of access. So how much access do we have? And the access could be, okay, I'm doing this again, but we can break it down also to kind of like the psychological access and then the physical access. Because some of those Israelis, I'm sure they held back. So we try to glean as much of their testimonies as we could. But we also, try to employ our historians in describing some of the, horrifying events, including, and of course, Palestinian testimonies were very important, including the one that got us a lot of issues, the Deir Yassin segment. And the Deir Yassin segment is one of the most graphic ones, and because of the nature, of course, of the massacre. But when we are talking about again, the issue of access, as I said, part of it is that the Israelis were holding back. I don't think they said a lot of the things they did. We did our best to glean out some details from them as we could, but I'm sure we still had a lot not narrated. But the second part, which is very crucial, is the fact that Israel destroyed the Palestinian National Archives twice, and now the third time they did it in Gaza. This total destruction of the infrastructure in Gaza, we focus on the infrastructure and on people because, of course, that's the primary concern, but people are not paying attention to the fact that they are, for the third time, destroying Palestinian National Archives in all of its manifestations, in terms of documents, archives, everything they could destroy, they destroyed already. They destroyed even birth, certificates, documentations like that, everything, the universities, knowledge production in Gaza. And that goes back actually to your other question about, kind of like survival conflict, right? It's either them or not, or us now. And that has been the mentality of the Israelis all along. But not only why am I mentioning that? Because not only did the Israelis destroy the Palestinian National Archives, but they looted whatever they could have their hands on. Whatever they didn't destroy, whether in Lebanon and now probably in Gaza, because I heard last time that they took a lot of documents out of Gaza, or in 1948, they kept this in their own archives and controlled it. So there is this control of the narrative, the control of the images, the control of the materials. Israel, initiated its embargo law on information. It's information law, I think, 1949, 1950. I can't remember the exact year. But anyway, when they initiated that law, they set the expiration date of the embargo on information and for 50 years. So from 1948 until 1998, we couldn't see anything related to 1948 or the creation of the State of Israel. Almost all information, whether Palestinian or Israeli, were absolutely classified, hidden and censored. And so that explains the wave of what we call new historians, new Israeli historians, or reformist historians. They go by several names, who came up with books that shocked first the state of Israel itself, the nation, its core, but also, shocked the world because of the revelations that were provided. That Palestinian scholars had been saying for ages, but nobody, believed them because, of course, when you are in power, your narrative, is the dominant one. But anyway, declassification of information in 1998 allowed the historians, to write. But because of the scandal, because it came and destroyed all this Israeli narrative about its own creation, the Israeli government went back and reclassified a lot of the information. It declassified in 1998. And not only this, the embargo with a rule from the Israeli High Court or Supreme Court, the embargo was extended to another 20 years. So until the year 2018, the embargo was actually put back in place, which meant more control of the information. And in 2018, a lot of people were anticipating, anxiously, because they wanted to, again, go back and study and have access to information. But the Netanyahu government at that time, remember, Netanyahu has been in power for 16 years, talking about the only democracy in the world. His government extended the embargo for 90 years, which means that until the year 2038, we will not see most of the information on, on 1948. We're talking about 1948, right? And everything else, of course, that they deem, security risk or whatever. So, and that also goes hand in hand with their imposition on people telling their stories also. So there are two films that I recommend, because if you think that the testimonies in our film are outrageous, watch these two films and you will be shocked. And those are Tantura and Deir Yassin. Those were made by Israeli filmmakers. And that shows you the difference. When an Israeli sits down and talks to another Israeli, the narratives are way different than talking to Andy or to a Palestinian. Of course, that probably never happens. But anyway, so those are uninhibited narratives of the atrocities that were done in 1948. So, but just know that the filmmaker, Shoshana, I can't remember her, Shoshani, the Israeli filmmaker of Born in Deir Yassin, she went to courts for years to be able to see the images of Deir Yassin, the massacre of Deir Yassin, because we know there are hundreds probably of pictures about Deir Yassin, the massacre. None of us can see those because they are hidden and sealed. And I know that the filmmaker, another Israeli filmmaker who helped us actually, no, I can't remember her name, the one who did Hidden and Looted. She has a very good film called Looted and Hidden, actually. Same thing.
Rona.
She went, Rana Sila. She went into courts, same thing. So we don't have access to the images that you would expect us to be able to put in the film. So that's what I was trying to explain. The issue of access, whether it's mental, psychological access in terms of the Israeli interviewees telling us what they did. And again, it's different when the filmmaker is Israeli, or whether having an actual physical access to evidence, which we are not allowed to. Go ahead, Andy. Sorry, I took too long.
No problem. So Ahlam talked about the access issue. So I'll talk about the other side of the coin, which is, deciding what to put in and what not to put in. Because there are very few violent images that we were able to track down, for one, but there are some. And for me personally, it goes back to 2006. I was working for a company that was based in Beirut. All of my coworkers were in Beirut, and I was in a San Diego office. And
I think he froze.
Okay, a quick follow-up maybe. You heard our colleague saying that
images.
What are
And for me personally, what happened wasn't that I was motivated by those horrific images to want to do more. what ended up happening was I just kind of shut down. I was just horrified by them, and I couldn't deal with it. And so I think Ahlam and I are of two different minds on this somewhat, but I feel like if we're going to try to convince Americans and educate Americans who are not deeply connected to this conflict for the most part, overwhelming them with like images of violence is not going to succeed at what we want to do. And I think it's also important, if you are overwhelmed with all these images of violence, then what you're going to look back on when you think about 1948 is it was this horrible time where a lot of people died. And that misses the main point of the story. And the main point of the story isn't about massacres or people being killed. That happened and it was horrific. The main point of the story is that one people pushed another people off of the land by force and has never allowed them to return. And if you miss that, then you've missed the entire story and you can't understand what's happening today. So I think that's what we really need to focus on. And that's what I aimed to focus on with the decisions that I made with Ahlam in the documentary. And you'll have to remind me of the other questions.
But I just want to add very quickly that it's also sometimes the narration is way stronger than the images. So there were powerful narrations, whether from the Israelis or from the Palestinians, who made, important points that probably putting, as Andy said, a very violent image would have taken away from the power of the narrative itself. So, for example, when Mordechai Ben Or is explaining how he hid and waited for Palestinians who came to harvest, blah, blah, blah. That like narrative thread, I think, was very important for someone to just listen to him and think the brutality of justifying his actions, would be just powerful to stand on its own as evidence. I hope that makes sense also.
And I agree with you. And I think my colleague's message was actually that one, like when you put out the violent images out there, it's a bad PR, bad narration, and it takes away all the dramatic effect of the complicit telling the story himself, rather than putting image out there, because we see everyday pictures are served, unfortunately, and people paying less and less attention, unfortunately, because it became new normal, unfortunately. So it seems that it was very wise directive decision, and it's well appreciated now across the board, I guess, on both sides, that you didn't resort to this kind of choice. And I have maybe 1,000 questions, and I know that you have all the passion to listen up. Yeah. So I really appreciate your time and your effort. And again, I say that it's a monumental work, a work of love, as you put it, and passion. And you paved the way for probably the later generations to tell the similar stories about, other massacres. And also there are Sabra and Shatila and many others waiting to be investigated and the story to be told. But really, we really appreciate your work. And if you have some closing remarks, we will be more than happy to listen to them. And we really appreciate your work. And if you have some closing remarks, we will be more than happy to listen. Otherwise, I just want my colleagues who actually organized this screening to say hello to you on the screen, and I want you to meet them in person. That will be really appreciated if you have time.
Can you show us the audience, please?
Yeah, I'll just.
I don't know if it's
we'll come back to the behind the screen. Yeah, we have some technical issues here. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting us, and sorry about the glitch this morning.
Yes, this is my colleague Turgay. This is Sumaya, and this is Sevde, and this is Ismail, who asked one of the questions. We are really delighted to have you And we are looking for another opportunity to talk about what was going on the ground right now. And I know that you have a lot to say from the experience and from the identity being a Palestinian. It's not a particularly good time to be a Palestinian, or being a movie director who has witnessed this all earlier and leaving the massacre on the ground. It's not a belated experience. I know that, and I appreciate your time and effort. Thank you very much. We are looking forward to see you again, and we are really delighted to have you. Have a nice day.
Yeah, just one quick point. Thank you so much for organizing this. In October, we made the full, as you might have discovered, we made the full documentary available online on YouTube for free. So anyone can go anywhere in the world can go and watch it. So if you could share this with as many people as you have connections to, we would very much appreciate it.
Yeah, that was a major step to publicizing this monumental work, and we really appreciate it. I know that your producer is not a greedy person, so she was allowing anyone who want to screen it almost for free. But now it's for free, and it's a big good news for us, and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
We don't have any more contractual obligations to our distributors, so we just went all out.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this is our first official screening in Turkey, I guess. So please, reach out to other universities. Would love to screen it everywhere.
We will do our best to amplify the voice of Palestinian people and the story to be heard. Thank you very much.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Andy.